What if we run away? What if we left today? What if we said goodbye?
You've heard of Spotify. It's a music streaming service that took the world by storm. But how and why? In this video essay, I want to examine Spotify as a case study to understand the role of music streaming in the music industry and to understand the controversy around music streaming. Let's start with some background information and then move into Spotify's role in the music industry and finally explore the controversy around Spotify.
My youth is yours, tripping on skies, sipping waterfalls.
According to a research paper by Kate Swanson, a veteran of the music and entertainment industries, Spotify was founded in October 2008 by Daniel Ek to combat illegal downloading. Its music catalog contains millions of songs.
My youth is yours.
According to Spotify, the streaming service offers 3 tiers. The 2 free tiers, often called freemium, are offered on desktop and mobile. The freemium desktop tier allows users to listen to any song on demand and make playlists, but the freemium mobile tier only allows users to shuffle through existing playlists. The freemium tiers are ad-supported, which means listening is also interrupted by ads. The third tier is a premium tier where users pay $9.99 a month for unlimited on-demand listening and the ability to make playlists on desktop and mobile without the interruption of ads. Spotify generates its revenue through the ads and the $9.99 per month paid by premium users.
My youth is yours, tripping on skies, sipping waterfalls. My youth is yours.
Let's move on to understanding what Spotify's role is in the music industry. To do this, I want to first briefly explain the history of digital music, then Spotify's mission to fight piracy, provide some examples of its effect on piracy in the music industry, and finish with an explanation of what Spotify's user metrics mean for the music industry. Swanson said the digitization of music began with the compact disc in 1983, better known as a CD. The CD allowed consumers to store music digitally rather than by analog methods. In the early 1990s, we saw the introduction of the MP3. These files were even smaller than CDs, and music files can now be emailed and easily shared online. In 1999, Napster was created, which was the first service for free music sharing. This prompted the growth of online music sharing and what would become a massive wave of music piracy. To fight music piracy, people began to develop other softwares and services to encourage cheap, legal alternatives to illegal downloads. That included Pandora, Rdio, and yes, Spotify. According to Spotify's page for artists, Spotify was built to combat piracy. Founder Daniel Ek said, "If we can build a service better than piracy, we can convince people to stop pirating music and engaging in illegal file sharing." According to this graph provided by Spotify, the company has effectively reduced piracy, particularly in 18 to 29-year-olds, the age group that pirates the most. Furthermore, this graph, also provided by Spotify, illustrates the amount of royalties Spotify pays to rights holders for every 1 million listens compared to other streaming services such as YouTube, Pandora, and traditional radio. Spotify claims it pays more money to artists than any other type of streaming service. Music fans spend less than $5 per month buying music, but on Spotify's premium tier, they pay $9.99 per month. This is important because the music industry and artists lost dramatic amounts of revenue from illegal downloading. While these statistics suggest that Spotify has done wonders for the music industry, it's important to remember that they come from Spotify and are therefore biased towards Spotify's success. Regardless, music streaming services have clearly taken the world by storm, and Spotify is among them. As we can see in this diagram provided by the Recording Industry Association of America and published in the Wall Street Journal, today, music streaming services like Spotify make up 21% of the music industry's revenue. These two pie charts compare music industry revenue streams in 2003 and 2013. While streaming's market share of the industry may not seem like much compared to the revenue earned through digital downloads and purchase of CDs, it's important to remember that streaming didn't even exist in 2003. In just 10 years, streaming services like Spotify account for just over a fifth of the music industry's total revenue. According to an article by Financial Times writer Richard Milne, Per Sundin, head of Universal Music in Sweden, cites Spotify as the backbone of Universal's success in Sweden. Sundin is adamant that while the music industry remained loss-making, Spotify saved it. Avicii's manager and producer Ash Pranori said that he always thought Spotify was the next big thing. He said, "How do consumers want to consume music? If you mimic the behavior as much as possible of illegal downloading and make it even easier and for a small payment, then you have the solution." For Pranori, that solution was Spotify. Besides Spotify's role of reducing piracy and helping the music industry and artists regain revenue, it also provides the industry with data that it has never had before. Milne said Spotify and other streaming services have the ability to track user metrics, which can be used to determine user behavior. For instance, a 2013 study analyzed a large dataset of users in Sweden, the UK, and Spain between 2010 and 2011 to find out more about user behaviors. The study found that there are strong daily patterns and significant variation in hourly arrival rates. One of the findings was that the least amount of people sign into Spotify around 2 a.m., and the number of arrivals increases sharply until 9 to 10 a.m., a time they call the morning peak. There is also an evening peak that occurs around 6 to 7 p.m. Interestingly, the morning peak of mobile sessions on weekdays is often 1 hour ahead of desktop sessions, and the researchers believe this is because the Spotify mobile app is often used while commuting to and from work. Information like this about user behavior tells the music industry when, where, and under what circumstances consumers are listening to music, helping them to better market and advertise music to them. According to Milne, Spotify can also help the industry know what music is being played by whom and when. Spotify's Jonathan Forster said that artists can plan tours by targeting cities where they have fans, and labels can see where they should boost marketing. Moreover, Spotify has already been in the process of adding other services for artists, including selling merchandise and concert tickets through Spotify and sending emails to users when a new song is released. Spotify was founded around the mission to combat piracy in the digital era of music by providing a cheap and legal alternative, and the digital nature of the service has allowed for the additional advantage of gathering data that can be used to study user behavior and help the industry recognize what works and what doesn't when selling music. However, despite Spotify's apparent success, there have been notable protests against the service. Now that I've talked about what Spotify is and its purpose, I want to discuss the controversy around it. The Spotify controversy revolves around its payment method, specifically how it calculates royalties. To discuss the controversy, I want to first explain how Spotify calculates and pays royalties, and then get into the positive and negative perceptions of Spotify held by artists, distributors and labels, publishers, and consumers. The perceptions will help to understand the debate over the fairness and the ethics of the streaming service. Spotify has reported that it pays 70% of all revenue to rights holders and keeps only 30%. 70% seems like a lot, so what are people complaining about? As detailed on Spotify's artist page, Spotify doesn't just pay 70% of the revenue from all streams of an artist's songs to that artist. In fact, Spotify doesn't calculate payment per stream at all. Spotify's royalties calculation actually looks like this. First, Spotify takes its monthly revenue from all displayed ads and premium user membership fees and multiplies it by the fraction of the artist's Spotify streams out of the total amount of Spotify streams that month. This means that the amount an artist can get paid is dependent on the artist's market share. To put what this means into perspective, let's say there's an artist who is relatively new and not well known. We'll call them the new band. Now, the new band just put out its first record, put it on Spotify, and they got 100 streams in April. Now let's say the new band does a lot of publicity and promotions, and the next month in May, they're able to bump their stream count up to 1,000. That's 10 times what they had in April. But let's also say that One Direction returned from hiatus and dropped a hit reunion album in May, and their fans are going crazy and their stream count is in the billions. That makes the new band's 1,000 stream count seem a lot smaller, and that's exactly what the market share means. Even though the new band is rapidly gaining followers, they can't match up to One Direction right now, so Spotify might still pay them the same amount for their 1,000 streams in May as they did for their 100 streams in April. Spotify also negotiates the royalties paid to rights holders through labels and publishers, and that generally comes out to about 70% of revenues. After Spotify has paid the rights holders, the labels and publishers determine how much of the payment actually goes to the artist. Artists are not the only rights holders of their music, and this means that they do not get the full 70% that Spotify pays out. Spotify's payment model is much more complex than just paying out 70% of their revenue to artists. Again, Spotify does not pay per stream, but if a per stream average were to be calculated, Spotify would pay between 0.6 and 0.84 of 1 cent per stream to be divided among all rights holders. I'm sure you can already begin to see why this payment model has caused so much protest and commotion. So let's talk about the different opinions of Spotify held by consumers, distributors and labels, publishers, and of course artists, since these opinions have directly caused a controversy. Let's start with consumers. Consumers actually don't have harsh opinions of Spotify. Swanson found in her research that because users have premium options and it's a convenient service, many people, especially young adults and people in their 20s, use it frequently. Those who don't use it choose not to because they think it's just a trend, so it's too much time to get used to a limited catalog that lacks real discovery features. In general, distributors and record labels have relatively positive outlooks on Spotify. Swanson interviewed Brad Sanders, the digital content manager for Secretly Canadian Distribution, who said that he expects royalties and payouts to continue rising as the industry adapts to changes, including streaming. Sanders said he recognizes that as an alternative to piracy, Spotify is definitely a step in the right direction, but Spotify's discovery mechanism should also be improved. Swanson also spoke with Jeff Beck, accounting manager at Saddle Creek Records, who noted that none of the label's artists have seen any noticeable downturns in sales from digital services like Spotify. Next, publishing companies, which are meant to protect, monitor, and monetize copyrights on behalf of its songwriters, also have somewhat positive outlooks. In Swanson's paper, she wrote that Sean McGraw, Vice President of Licensing and Administration for Downtown Music Publishing in New York City, said his company's general position towards Spotify is acceptance. McGraw said Downtown Music Publishing has never withdrawn or prevented anything from being on music streaming sites, but it has also never authorized Spotify to use any of its compositions, as labels are currently doing the authorizing on behalf of the publishing companies, which they aren't allowed to do. Downtown Music Publishing hasn't observed any negative impacts of streaming services to date, but they are apprehensive for the future and concerned about how Spotify will be restructured to be fair in the coming years. Now that we've discussed the relatively mild opinions of consumers, distributors and labels, and publishers, let's get into artist perceptions, since artists are generally viewed as the people who are most impacted by Spotify's royalties calculations and the ones who lose the most. Milne said many artists, including Radiohead, say that artists should fight Spotify, and bands such as the Black Keys refuse to put new music out on Spotify immediately. According to Swanson, Bob Nana, lead vocalist and guitarist for emo post-hardcore group Braid, said that the band gets paid almost nothing for streams and that his band had received less than $5 from Spotify since adding their 100-plus song catalog to the streaming service. Nana said that Spotify isn't artist-focused and its royalty structure isn't sustainable for small bands, and his band is concerned that Spotify is more interested in building their business than helping artists in the music industry. And of course, Taylor Swift has not been shy about her stance against Spotify. In 2014, Taylor Swift pulled all of her music from Spotify. In an interview with Time magazine in 2014, she said that she felt there should be an inherent value placed on art and that she didn't see that happening with her music on Spotify. She added that streaming has been shrinking the amount of paid album sales, and she mentioned her preference for other services that required users to pay a premium package in order to access her album, putting a perception of value on her music, something that Spotify lacks. Milne added that former musician Per Harry, who is now a lawyer for the Swedish Musicians Union, said record labels rather than Spotify are the villains of this story. He said artists only receive 6 to 10% of Spotify's average per-stream payout to rights holders, but most artists are afraid of speaking out and burning bridges or making fans think they're only interested in money. Harry says the big companies are the only winners. Not all artists have viewed Spotify negatively, however. As Swanson wrote in her paper, a select few look upon the service with optimism. Jamie Levinson, drummer of rock band White Rabbits, said he was very hopeful about Spotify and his band sees it as a discovery tool. He acknowledges that the revenue-generating aspect of Spotify is not entirely fair to musicians and songwriters right now, but he's not interested in making money from Spotify. Levinson explained that his band makes most of its money touring and selling merchandise because that's where they're most autonomous in their financial control. Many artists are also using Spotify to monetize pre-release streams and generate interest in new albums. For instance, if an artist announced a new album to be released in a month and released a single from the album today, the artist could generate revenue from the single in the month leading up to the album release and use the single as a sample of what the album will be to get listeners excited about it. In general, artists appreciate that Spotify allows more people to access their music legally, but particularly for lesser-known artists, it's just not enough. Popular artists receive most of their income from touring and are more interested in figuring out how to make Spotify work for them. But smaller acts that are dependent on album sales rather than touring rely on what they believe to be fair payments and are concerned with Spotify's royalty structure. Furthermore, many artists maintain the fear that Spotify is just another business that doesn't care about the artist, and they have expressed the belief that revenues from music streaming are only supplements to album sales, not replacements. To summarize, Spotify was founded with a great purpose and a greater dream to save the dying music industry from the detrimental effects of piracy. While the data it can provide is tremendously beneficial as well as revolutionary, Spotify's method of calculating royalties for rights holders is complex and convoluted. It's also often viewed as unfair, particularly for artists, and it is from this payment model that the Spotify controversy came to be. Many parties praise Spotify's success and efforts, but many artists are frustrated and worried about being fairly paid.
Too late.